I'm Meyer. I'm president. I own a company called Recreation Resource Management. My company was formed quite a while back to actually privatize not the parks themselves, we don't own them, but the operation of public parks. Just in brief, we don't take any tax money. The government typically charges a fee, but that fee is not enough with their high cost position to run a park. And so they have to supplement that with tax money. What we do is we can come along and for whatever fee they're charging, we can usually profitably operate the park just with that, without the tax money, and keep the park open and well maintained. And so that's what I do. But it leads me to have a service business with lots and lots of employees all over the country from Washington to California. And so we're also a very low margin business. We're 4 or 5% of revenue margin business. And so we're very sensitive to the cost of regulation, cost of labor, things like that. And the reason I was originally going to call this presentation why I'm leaving California, which we are leaving California as a company, which is odd because California is by far the most lucrative recreation market in the country. It has the most recreation, it has the richest people. But we're still leaving it because, as you'll see from some of this, it's become an expensive headache to try to do business there. But I've got a different title for it. There's a guy named, I think it was Ray Kurzweil that coined it, but it could have been somebody else. I don't know enough about the space. But he talked about the thing called the singularity. And the singularity was this point when technology is moving so fast that it's improving so fast that nobody can even keep up with the technology. I mean, your iPhone, it'd be as if your iPhone was the features were being added so fast that you couldn't even learn the new features before there was 3 more. What I call this presentation is the regulation singularity. The regulation in certain places this year for me and my business has been moving so fast that even with cutting out everything else I do as a manager, we've killed all expansion plans, we've killed everything, any customer service improvement, we've killed cost control. Every bit of my free time, every bit of my manager's free time has been set up trying to learn how to comply with these regulations as fast as they're hitting us, to do the training we need, to do the systems we need, and we still can't keep up, particularly in California. And so that, and I'm going to give you a taste for that. Instead of just giving 1 or 2 stories, I'm just going to shotgun a lot of small little snippets. And I apologize, I don't know if that's going to work, I haven't tried it before, but I've come away from this with 2 or 3 long stories, and people said, you're just a disgruntled business guy. They just found one guy that had a couple bad stories. So I'm going to try to paint a more picture of what's going on. But then I want to talk about something else, which is even beyond the regulations. I think something's happening culturally, that these regulations are changing the incentive structure for people growing up within them and creating a cultural change that's to me almost worse than the regulations themselves in terms of trying to run my business. We're going to talk about, we'll start, it was interesting, we were talking about licensing, and I know you see all the Uber, Lyft stuff, and we've had some of that with, and you see all the taxis pushing back against Uber and Lyft. You heard the dentist example. We have the same thing with liquor licenses. I've got to spill my guts for every liquor license and get fingerprinted just to make sure that these 1930s laws make sure I'm not still Al Capone. And we have places, for example, with a liquor license, just to give you an idea of licensing, where when we fill out all this paperwork and it takes forever, it's actually turned over to all the other license holders. And the county will ask everybody else, do you think we need another liquor license? And everybody else will say, what are they going to say? No, we got it all covered. We got all the demand covered. There's no more demand. There's no need for any more supply in this market. And so my liquor licenses twice have been turned down in counties that do that. And they said, we don't have a demand. And we finally, after years and years, got their liquor licenses in part because I run things on federal and state property, and I got the feds in the state to come in and advocate for me why the feds in the state wanted a liquor license on this property. But the whole licensing thing has just gotten crazy. It's not just passing the test. It's actually being turned over to your competitors to tell you whether or not you can be in or out. Licensing applies to facilities. When we moved to Ventura County, California, the first day our landlord's always the government, and often nowadays when we take these places over, they've been run down because one of the things the government doesn't do is preventive maintenance. They like building new things, but they don't like maintaining them. And so it was really run down, and the inspector from the county came out and said, hey, we condemn this deck. Got to get rid of this thing, it's unsafe. And we agreed. Unsafe, get rid of the deck. So the next day we started taking the deck apart, and a county guy was out there, and they said, no, you can't do that. We said, no, it just got condemned, you told us to. So no, but you still have to get the permit. It took us 7 permits, 9 months and over $1,800 in permit fees to finally get permission to remove the deck that they condemned. Later on, we wanted to put a trailer. We actually did put a trailer to collect tickets, you know, for a boating thing out in the parking lot near the dock. And the county came out and said, no, you can't put that out there, you need a permit. So it took us 5 permits and a bunch of money and months, the highlight of which was that one of the permits required a soil sample, so we actually had to core through the asphalt parking lot to get the sample of the soil. Because when you come to regulations, there's no exceptions. I mean, that's where the people doing these things are measured on following the process. The only way to screw up as a bureaucrat is not follow the process, is to get caught not following the process. There's no reason to take risks. And so then the other kind of interesting example just from licensing is we actually had a gas tank, and this is really unintended consequences. When we came out there, they were filling boats up with 5-gallon containers like you use for your lawnmower. Well, you do that, and the thing would overflow, and they're bulky, and people get hurt. But even more important, the gas would overflow the engine and go in the water, and there's an environmental problem. It was a real mess. And we transported them all rattling around the back of a truck. And so we proposed putting a tank, double-wall tank, with a filler that had an overflow protection so the gas wouldn't get in the water, and it had an emissions thing. It sucked up the vapors, you know, like you do in California. Never got a permit. 5 years, we finally left the location. Never got a permit, even though everybody in the whole planet agreed it was the best solution. It was. You couldn't get a permit for this new thing, even though it was better than and safer on every dimension than the old thing. Labor regulation is a lot of my life. I have 350 employees. I'll give you a fact. It is a firing offense in my company in California to work through lunch. You say, oh my God, Warren, you're a madman. You know, you got somebody that's working their little butts off, you know, at lunch, and you should be giving them a gold star, you should give them a raise. But in California, as an employer, I have an affirmative responsibility to make sure everybody gets a 30-minute non-working unpaid lunch. And if they do not get it, even if they volunteer to work and they want to work, it's my responsibility to make sure they don't work and have lunch. And it cost me tens of thousands of dollars before I finally figured out that what we were doing wasn't compliant with the law. Because what we were doing is having them, if they wanted to work, we got them to sign a little thing and say, hey, I want to work through lunch, and we thought we were covered. They've expressed their preferences, and we'll get back to that in a little while. But in California, you can't work through lunch. So I have actually in my life fired somebody for diligently working through lunch. Because otherwise I would face fines from the state for allowing them to do so. We have the same thing in California with chairs. You have to provide everybody a chair and a sitting opportunity. The chair we almost got sued for a chair being the wrong height. And there's a whole process. And again, all this takes time. You have to write the process. I have to write it down. You have to write the process down. You have to confirm the chairs are right. You have to train everybody on it. And you have to have a process in place that your managers, one of the things they're thinking of is not how well the store is merchandised and how well customers are served, but they have to be thinking about, are their employees getting their chair time like they're supposed to? And then, you know, I had to pay off a lawyer to go away and stop suing me over the font in my paycheck in California. The font size was wrong. And then, of course, and so when you get to things like raising the minimum wage, Don's talked about this, so I want to get into it. So certainly California, a lot of states are doing that. But the things that make the news, like taxes and minimum wage, are not the only things, not even the biggest things that are barriers to my business. You know, we've got paid sick leave and other things coming along. In health and safety in California, we had to train everybody on heat stress plans. Well, first we had to write heat stress plans. So we have to have a special plan in place for when the temperature goes over 85 degrees. We have to prove to the state that everybody's been trained on it and that we have the process. We actually have to have a drill for it at least once a year. So we had to have our heat stress drill for when the temperature got over 85 degrees. I know you're all laughing your ass off. I grew up in Houston. I live in Phoenix. I mean, the temperature goes over 85 degrees in my house. I mean, anyway, and then MSDS sheets. We don't have one here, but you like Windex. And for years and years, everybody told me, well, you know, if you have solvents and stuff, you have to have your MSDS sheets. But it turns out, even like Windex, if it's a consumer thing, you don't have to. Well, that's actually not true. We got busted on this from Cal OSHA. It's okay you don't have to have an MSDS if you're using it like a consumer. But if your people are doing janitorial work, they're not using it like a consumer. A consumer cleans windows once a month. They're cleaning windows every day. They're using it much more often. You have to have an MSDS sheet. And they have to have access to it. And all my people work from their RVs. So we had to pay a consultant to create a computer system so that all our employees could have online access to all the MSDS sheets for the Windex so they know that they're safe, you know, cleaning windows. Workers' comp in California long ago had these lodging rules. And it used to be like at mines and stuff, the employers would have bunkhouses. And so if somebody got hurt in the bunkhouse, it became a tradition, part of the law in California, that's really a workers' comp injury because the employer controls the bunkhouse. Since then, though, my employees all live in their own RV. I just provide them like a camping space and some utilities, but they come and they live in their own trailer or RV, motor coach. They've applied California bunkhouse rules to the RV. That means if somebody in their own home, in their off time, gets drunk, falls, hits their head, it's a workers' comp injury and I pay for it. And I realized this is not like a bunkhouse. I don't own that RV. I can't legally go into it. I can't approach it. It is their home. I can't change the practices of them. I can't set safety procedures for them. I can't enforce anything. I can't inspect it for safety. But if they hurt themselves doing something boneheaded in their off time, in their RV, I pay for it. ACA, since we're talking about healthcare, the ACA, that's Obamacare for those don't know all the letters and didn't read all 2,300 pages, shame on you. The ACA, the employer mandate cuts in next year. It will apply to us. We have about 350 employees. Most are seasonal, but they have this FTE thing, full-time equivalent. So if I have 350 employees and they work on average half the year, that means I have half that, 175 full-time equivalents. That's over the number, and so I have to provide health care next year. Unfortunately, of all those people, I also, most of my people are Medicare, most of my people are in their 70s, high retired people. Due to a lot of other things, nobody will write our insurance. So I'm legally required to have insurance, and 12 different companies have refused to write it. Every major company in the business has refused to write the insurance. So I'm facing, and we actually planned for this a year ago, we actually started planning for the fact that I was going to have to pay the penalty for not providing health care. And there's actually two penalties. Well, one for not providing it all, and then one for it not being affordable. So I was going to have to pay the penalty. And the penalty is only payable, though, for full-time employees. Full-time employee is more than 30 hours a week, or for a whole year. For a seasonal business like me, it's over 1,560 hours. I have that number memorized. I will tell you my biggest business achievement of the year. And I mean, this, seriously, if I was going to write, if I had a boss, I was going to write myself up and say, what did you do this year that really saved the company? I'd say, I did nothing with the customer. I did nothing to grow the company. I did nothing to cut costs. But what I did do is I took our 350 people who were mostly full-time, and I managed to get them all on part-time except for 36. So I took a whole bunch of full-time people in the workforce and I converted them to part-time workers, and so that I only have 36 full-time people. And so the penalty I'm going to pay is limited. You subtract 30, so I only pay penalty on 6, and I'm only going to have $12,000 in penalty. But I was facing almost $1 million in penalty. And so I got a $1 million penalty down to $12,000, and that's my achievement. That's what I spent my time on, is making sure that workers can't work full-time. So all these people basically, they're working fewer hours, but they all basically got a salary cut of about $5,000. You say they're working, they went from 2,000 hours a year to 1,500, and they're making $10 an hour. Say they don't make a ton of money, and that's $5,000. So I went and I cut a whole bunch of people. I added extra people, so I increased the size of my workforce, have a lot more people working part-time, and now I'm the ACA. And you say, well, Warren, you sound like, just like Don was saying, you sound like a terrible person. And I feel like a terrible person. I don't want to do this. I don't want to have to train twice as many people to work half the time. But that $2,000 is a $2,000 tax on full-time employment. Okay, the government can call it whatever they want, but the actual real consequence to a business person is that looks like a $2,000 tax on full employment. And I said, okay, if you're going to tax it, I'm going to do less of it. Just like you say, just like the whole logic, the same people that don't believe that actually happens are the same ones that want to have a carbon tax, because they say logically, if I have a carbon tax and raise the price of fossil fuels, people will use less, and that's right. But if you raise the price of full-time labor, I'm going to use less too. And that's what's happened over my last year. The last thing in California that really makes this hard is the bounty system. California doesn't just have regulations like most of these states do. I'll give you an example from Kentucky. In Kentucky, we were minding our own business one day in our store, and an inspector came in and said, we need to see your egg license. Now, at first I thought it was like Candid Camera or like Monty Python skit coming in asking for the egg license. Who had ever heard of that? But we have eggs sold in the cooler, like just a carton and styrofoam. Apparently you have to have a license for that. In Kentucky, you have to have a license to sell eggs. But it turned out to be no big deal. They said, look, take the eggs out of the cooler, take them off sale, get your license. When you do, I'll approve you and you're fine. It cost me 20 bucks. There was no back penalty, there was no going to court. It was like, we understand why you didn't have an egg license, you got 30 days to fix it, I fixed it. California doesn't work that day. You don't get 30 days to fix anything. You don't get a grace period. You don't get anything. You get a lawyer in your face serving you saying, you owe $4,000 a day to me plus my legal expenses for me having identified this shortfall. And that shortfall might be your counter is a ½ inch too high for ADA. Your font is wrong on your paycheck. Okay? And so they have this bounty system where many health, safety, and employment regulations are enforced by providing bounties to law firms to go find it. And their incentive system is not to let you off the hook, right? Because they get nothing. Their incentive system is not to give you 30 days to comply. In fact, they don't want you to know that they found this out, because if you fix it, they get no money. They don't want you to fix it. They want to bust you for it and get the money and have you pay them off. And so that is why I spend my time in California. You say, Warren, why aren't you spending your time figuring, I have an opportunity to do a big expansion in Tennessee, I'm not spending time on it. Why aren't you doing that? It's illogical. You might make an extra $50,000 a year. And I'm saying because instead I am spending my time not to lose $200,000 a year in California. Because I lay awake at night worried about it. My employee handbook in California gets reviewed 4 times a year because the law changes so fast. And if some lawyer finds a little thing in that employee handbook that suddenly doesn't fit the law, he will sue me and I'll be out minimum $25,000 just to pay his legal expenses, plus whatever fees and fines become. So that's where I get to this notion about culture. Is I think all of this is that these incentives are changing the culture. And I'm going to give you an illustration from employment. For most of my workers are retired. They're in their 60s and 70s. When I turn in my employee list to my insurer and he sees birthdays in the 1920s, he says, you must have a typo. And he says, no, I got this dude, he's like 91 and he weed eats out in Florida, and that's how he stays busy. So I have a lot of people that's older traditionally. But since 2008, something new has happened. There's a lot of young people got put on the street. They've given up on employment. They might be college. Their dad buys them an RV, or they buy a cheap RV. And young people start coming to me. And at first, I was excited. I was saying, God, this is great. A new generation, and I can maybe get more vigor, and I can get new customers that are young, and new ideas. And this is great. Turns out, until that started happening, in 10 years, I hired 350 people a year. 10 years, I had 0 employee lawsuits. I never even had a threat of one. In the last 3 years, I have had 6 lawsuits, plus 3 or 4 I paid off early to go away, and every one of them was under 45, mostly under 40. There's a new generation of people that deal with employment, the legal system, and everything else differently. That employment is an opportunity to go, get a jackpot through the legal system, not necessarily to go earn a paycheck for hard work. And that's not everybody, but it doesn't take very many people to make my life hell. By the way, I won all 6 of those cases. You're probably sitting there thinking maybe this guy's just a jerk slave driver. I won all 6. They all got dismissed. One of them, as an example, a woman sued me for discrimination, said her supervisor was discriminating against her. Okay? Didn't give me too many facts, but she didn't have to. You don't. And it turned out, by the way, her supervisor was her sister. So she was suing us over because she had a fight with her sister. But in California particularly, when you can't get these things dismissed because the legal system is packed with people that have sympathy against businesses, all somebody has to do is point at you, and that's $20,000. Okay? Even if you win early, it's a $20,000 in legal fees. That's why in my employee practices insurance, no one will give me a deductible or anybody else in less than $25,000. So 6 winnings, I've won 6 times, and it cost me $120-something thousand. 6 Pyrrhic victories, right? Plus the other people I paid off $3,000 to $5,000 to please go away and not impose a $20,000 another stupid Pyrrhic victory on me. And so that's the world that we're increasingly finding. And we saw this back. Remember that I told you about the lunch break thing? We actually saw they all came in a group twice. In November, both times. And we finally asked what was going on, and we found out 2 things. The first thing we found out was that they were coming in November because people were saving these things up so that they could get Christmas money out of us. And we were going to be, and so that's how they're going to get their Christmas money, is by using this lunch break law to take us on the technicalities of that. And remember, these are people who signed something to me begged me to let them work through lunch because they needed the extra 30 minutes to let work. It's not a wealthy area. They begged me for the work. They signed something and said, yes, I want you to give the work. And then they walked into the state of California and said, state of California said, my employer forced me to do that. He is a slave driver. He's cheating me and he's making me do this, and I need all these lunch breaks like that. And so that sort of sense of honor, or whatever you call it, we're seeing it more and more kind of out in the system. And I won't even talk about the California attorneys who, you know, the sister who sued the other, it finally got dropped, but the attorney came to us and said, I will get my client to drop it if you pay me personally, the attorney, $10,000. Elsewise, well, we'll impose years. I won't go away and I'll impose years. And so we did. We didn't pay him 10, we paid him less. But we paid him to sell this client out. So I mean, it is a crazy world where traditional notions of honor and fair play have really been purged, you know, out of the system. I just got a couple more minutes here, and I talked about the Christmas cash. And by the way, I said there's two reasons. The other reason is this is a poor town. We're the only business, really, the only real employer, because all the orange groves have gone away. So a lawyer met with them like every Sunday, had all my employees over to potluck, like Sundays, like every 2 or 3 Sundays, and they would brainstorm how they were going to extract money from it. I mean, that was it. And so finally I got so tired of it, I closed it, and now they have 0 employers in the area because nobody's come back and taken that place over. I'll give you one more story. I can keep going on and on, just like Don. We have a similar thing in California with unemployment. When my employees, I told you most of them retired, and they go and they work for me in the summer, and in the winter they take off because they're retired. It's out 12 months. I'm going to work a little in the summer, live in a nice campground, you know, in the mountains, and then take the winter off. In California, we have the worst unemployment insurance rate you could possibly have. I pay 7% of expenses. Why that is I've never had a layoff until this year. That's we've been closing. But I never had a layoff, and I had the worst possible unemployment metric. That's because everybody who was taking the winter off would call up California and say, hey, I'm desperately looking for work, can't find a thing, send me my employment check. And they would all do that. And at one point, 3 or 4 of them were living in Mexico all winter, calling up and getting unemployment checks. And I finally called the state unemployment board and said, I got to report these guys. They're living in Mexico. They are not looking for work. And the unemployment board said, if you push this, you're subject to being sued as an employer for retaliation. And I said, all right, never mind. I guess I'll just build it into my prices. And so we just moved on from there. Anyway, so in conclusion, I didn't really structure this very well. I'm sorry, I was kind of all over the place. But I will tell you that my wife comes to me and said, Warren, it's obviously a hard year. You don't seem like you're having fun. I said, no, I'm really not. This is the first year I've ever not had fun running my own business. It's always been fun to this point because I'm just not doing anything for the business. I'm working for the government. I mean, that's all I'm doing is trying to keep up with this. And I'm worried all the time because I'm not keeping up. It's happening faster than I can keep up. I mean, I still am not up on the PPA-CA compliance, and there's new forms that have to go out to every employee, and all this tracking, and it's still not done. And I think it'll be done, but it takes a ton of my time personally to get that done, and it's driving me crazy. And she said, well, do you want to sell the company? I said, probably, but I'm not ready to sell it. And I said, I'm going to be ready to sell it because I got to find my next company. And I've got to find a company that doesn't employ anybody. And I know that sounds terrible, but I honestly, where are people investing nowadays? They're investing in the internet, in places that have large amounts of value and revenue with very few highly skilled employees, right? They're not investing in big service business. There's no new McDonald's and Nordstroms and Best Buys. They're all gone. They're all gone. I mean, they're all. It's fine to have high value for a few employees because you can suck all this stuff up, but have a 5% margin and 350 employees that are all low skilled and constantly have rising minimum wages and all these other costs. It's impossible. That business model is impossible. And we talk about, well, these things are kind of unintended consequences. You know, minimum wage and all these laws. We're trying to defend, you know, the downtrodden and trying to work on income, you know, because there's an income gap in the rich and poor and things like that. And I said, you're just making it worse because you're driving all these. The world is going to be full of wealthy, high-skilled people and low-skilled people without a job because it's becoming impossible. And I love a lot of these guys and my employees. I mean, there's a few bad eggs, but I mean, I love my employees and I love what I do, but it's becoming impossible to employ them because every year more and more costs, taxes essentially, on employing people get thrown onto my business. So that's my not very inspiring talk, but I appreciate your time. Thanks. Your questions? Yeah.
Another area that I'm involved in is the entrepreneur investor community, angel investing, etc.
Yeah.
And most of the time, the entrepreneurs that come to us looking for money don't know a whole lot about what they're getting into,
Right.
like you were
Right.
talking about. They're thinking they've got the greatest product or the greatest service they're going to
Right.
get out to the public, and then 5 years from now they're going to sell out to a big corporation or whatever.
Right.
And one of the admonitions I give to them is you better look at the regulatory environment, because your investors are going to make you look at it
Right.
before you can really get some money to go where you want to go. And the second thing, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, is the IRS.
Right.
You didn't even hardly talk
Well, I
about
got to
them.
make money first, but I got to make money first
Right.
before that's even.
But in any event,
Yeah, I know. And I'll say to be fair, the reason I left taxes off is, and I think within the Republican Party in particular, there's a lot of focus on taxes, okay? And I don't think there's enough focus on things beyond the explicit tax system that act like a tax nevertheless. And so that's why I tend to speak about those things. It's not to underplay the issues with the IRS and the incentive system. You said something first, and I had a comment on the entrepreneurs. Yeah, I think it's if you look at it's very dangerous in the economic world. At least I come from the climate world. I'm a climate skeptic. Get my house egged for that. But the climate world in my mind is a lot like the economic world. It's just this extraordinarily complex system that everybody wants to point to the one thing that's the driver of everything else. And I don't think there's ever one thing that's the driver of everything else. But you do see that the business formation numbers have been dropping over the last decade in a fairly unprecedented way, while business failures are about the same level. And so at some level, the number of new businesses and small businesses almost have to be going down. And I think that's because, all this regulation is you've got to have economy of scale to do it. I mean, the things I'm doing are easy, are things that Pizza Hut or PepsiCo does in their sleep. But they're really, really large. I mean, it costs me, I have to pay $20,000 a year for this new HR system to try to deal with some of this stuff. That's a lot of money for me, $20,000 a year. That system costs the same to Pepsi. It's still $20,000 a year for them. It's a little larger, but it's essentially, it doesn't go up in proportion to their size. So it's just, it pushes to bigness to have the economy of scale to deal with all this stuff.
well, an example, quickly, is Home Depot. One of the founders some months ago said that Home Depot could not...
He could never do it again. I saw that, yeah.
Couldn't do it. Well, the CEO of Home Depot, not the founder, made a presentation at Michael Honest Club, and in it he talked about the regulatory environment,
Yeah.
whatever. And afterward, I asked him, what about the tax system? How do they cope with it? He said, we've got the assets that you're talking about to cope with the regulatory environment.
Right.
But small business doesn't.
Right.
So that's exactly what you're saying.
So when you pull out of California, is there a business or any businesses that are going to benefit from that, or is the market that you handle is that?
It depends on the location. So because my locations are contracts, some of them never get reopened, like the one in Ventura County. Some of them, I'll sell them if I can. Look, I'm still after. I mean, I'm not trying to make a point. I'm not trying to spite California because California doesn't know I exist. So I'm trying to sell it on the way out. So somebody will inherit the business and sort of keep it there. So it'll keep going. But the problem is, one of the things we're facing is for me, the public recreation business, my customer, is the lowest end of the lodging end. I mean, the camper who camps overnight in a Forest Service campground is the most price-sensitive end of the whole lodging business. I mean, $18 a night is a lot for them. And we're talking about when the minimum wage in California, goes up from 8 to 10. That increase alone has cost me, just to break even, had to jack rates up from 20 to 23. And so you keep getting these, and then not to mention ACA and all these other things. So if there's not a competitive hole, if there's somebody still working it, there's somebody who's going to have to charge more, and it ends up out of the consumer pocket, somewhere along the way. Somebody pays for it.
So I think this may be a loaded question, but I've been fortunate enough in my business that our employees are 1099. But we've been thinking about moving into a business that is not too friendly to 1099. So we will be going into a W-2
You've been
situation.
spoiled, dude, if you manage to, because our business all got pushed 10 years ago by the IRS or by the Labor Department from being 1099 to being on the payroll. It's night and day.
The things that we're doing in technology, and people are all over the country.
Right.
So, do you think we should move into that brick and mortar?
I don't know. I can't tell you that. Look, I'm not trying to be a one-man destroyer of the modern economy. You know, and if anybody read The Foundation, there's this character called the Mule that ran around and depressed everyone until the whole society collapsed. You know, so I don't want to be that guy. I'm just saying it's eyes open. You need to be going into low margin, unskilled labor force don't mix very well. Okay, I'm saying those two things. I think they're high margin labor business that work fine. If you have a high margin, if you have skilled labor, it's probably fine because a lot of this stuff doesn't affect you as much. But the whole unskilled labor market in the low margin service business, which is a lot of that stuff. I mean, everybody talks about Walmart making all this money. Walmart makes 2% of revenues or something, right? And McDonald's doesn't make that much. I mean, so this is in the low margin service business with unskilled labor. That's I think that's going to be really, really hard to make fly. But maybe maybe somebody figures out how to do it. I don't know. I haven't figured out how to do it. I don't want to say it's impossible.
The answer is outsource to another country.
Unfortunately, then you're just moving the problem across the line somewhere.
When you leave, will the county take over the administration of the park again so that it reverts back to what it was before you approved it?
It depends. In most cases, they don't have the resources.
If they don't have to pay the permit fees.
In the world of privatization, especially in the recreation world, they only come to us when they've exhausted. We're off the bottom of the list. They only come to us when they've exhausted everything else.
When the county had it, did they have to pay all these permit fees for anything that they did?
Oh, no.
themselves?
If the county's running, and the feds don't do any of this stuff because the feds run a lot of these things, and the feds tell the county to go take a hike. You know, so the feds do cut the Gordian knot a little bit, and the feds also, by the way, compete with me because they exempt themselves from the Fair Labor Standards Act. So the people that I pay minimum wage or $8 or $10 to, they take it volunteer labor. They take all their camp hosts are volunteers. So the feds will exempt themselves from anything, but their costs are still higher than mine, unbelievably.
It reminds me of, we have 2 private bus companies running up and down, and we now have one. The second one experienced a terrible fire, and they never found how that happened.
Right.
But MARTA...
Are you applying this like a Sopranos kind of thing?
Yeah. But MARTA benefited from that guy going out of business.
Right.
And so part of what you're saying is that, you may be replaced by government corruption and self-dealing. Because when you came in and actually improved things, they overcharged you out of business.
Right. It could be, though. It tends to be... the only thing about that theory is that when you say government, it's shortcutting a lot of different authorities. Okay, because so I may be working with one government and maybe 4 others that are making my life miserable. But I will say that the feds are really good. The one thing I would say to that is the feds are really, really good at exempting themselves from any of this stuff that they don't like. Congress too.
All right, I guess I have 2 questions here. I'll keep them short. The main one is, could you say that over the past 50 years, like the amount of regulations being put out has increased exponentially?
Yeah, well, probably. Even if it's added as a percentage basis, the same every year, it never goes away. I mean, that's the problem. Is it just keeps. It's like it doesn't go away, so it just keeps piling on top of itself. So yes, I would say that's a fair statement. I mean, you certainly get that. I would say that if you graph the pages in the Federal Register, it would be an exponential curve.
80,000 pages.
This ties in somewhat to the second thing. You say that you were potentially leaving, I believe it was California, correct?
Yeah.
you're leaving that, however, the seed for this is potentially scattered throughout the country as well. How are you possibly planning to dodge this?
I don't know. I mean, that's why I said that I'm actually considering selling the whole thing ahead of California getting. I live in Arizona, and I have an observation. And by the way, I have lots of friends in California. I mean, it's not like don't dislike everybody in the state, but it's California is an odd thing that I think Don's even put it on his blog. They look at net migrations out of California. You can look at U-Haul rate. Economists can look at U-Haul rates, and the U-Haul rates are much more expensive coming out of California than going back in because they can't even get anybody to take the equipment back because everybody's leaving. And so, everybody leaving California, but when they get to places like Arizona, they show up and they say, thank God I'm out of California. That place is so crazy. It's so screwed up. You can't get anything done. And then they proceed to vote for all this exact same crap that caused it in the first place. I do not understand it, but it is, I'm an immigration supporter in Arizona. I have lots of Hispanic friends. I would love to have more. I think it's a fabulous influence on us. I know some people in the room may disagree with me, but I say all the time, let's let the Mexicans in and keep the Californians out.
So I actually lived here for a long time, but just the last couple of years I was in California. Beautiful state.
It's
But
gorgeous.
yeah, all sorts of trouble.
That's why we do a lot of recreation there. It's
Yeah,
gorgeous.
exactly. So I was wondering though that you talk about these problems with regulation, and I'm wondering, there's a lot of businesses that do work in California, and I'm wondering how many of them are just using governmental connections, having friends in the right places. Does that help in these kinds of
I'm sure
things?
there's a ton of cronyism because that's the way the incentives work. So I'm sure there's a ton of cronyism, and the people that stay there survive a lot by that cronyism. I will say that, and there's again, you do get people where there's very high value labor, like in the Silicon Valley area with the internet and stuff. You have high value labor products, and it seems to be able to survive California better. And it's actually good for your workforce because for those high value labor, they love California and they're attracted to it. It's a good way to attract people. So there's a value proposition to get folks there. But I will tell you right now, folks that manufacture, in service businesses, you got all this wealth in California, and you're a service business, you want to serve. Okay, you jack up the price. A camping rate, like state parks in California charges $30 a night for a campground with no hookups. Now, y'all don't know what that means, but I would tell you that in Georgia, if somebody tried to charge $30 for a no utility campsite in the state of Georgia, people would freak. It's just unprecedented, okay? There's no way it would happen. So you just jack up your prices if you're a service business. I couldn't do it enough because I can't do it enough because the government authorities don't let us raise the prices enough to cover that. That's why I'm leaving. But so service business, you're gonna make it work. I don't know why manufacturers stay unless it's pure cronyism. Or it's just inertia. Anybody who manufactures something that transports all over the world, I don't understand the least. I actually thought for a while about doing a venture firm or doing a private equity firm, and we just go in and specialize in buying out California manufacturers and taking them somewhere else.
On that price though, they charged me $20 to drive through Joshua Tree. Not
Yeah.
not the cab, the drive through.
Zoom, there we go, $20. Yep. Is that it? One more?
You're commenting on right then about a private equity firm where you move companies
Yeah.
outside of California. Is there anywhere that's particularly strong relative to regulation?
Every place is flawed. I'm doing a lot of work in Tennessee. Tennessee has some interesting aspects, but the flip side is Tennessee has some crazy stuff too. Florida has some interesting aspects, but Florida has almost as bad a culture around slip and fall, sue your boss, sue the store kind of stuff. Just drive through Florida, all you see is billboards for lawyers the whole way. Just next time you drive through an interstate in Florida, all you will see is lawyer billboards. Count them, you can play a game with it. Like if you played a drinking game, you'd run off the road in the first mile. Alabama, a lot of southern states have been great to us. Alabama's been great to us. Tennessee has been great to us. And I will tell you that all my expansion over the next 2 years is all in Alabama and Tennessee. It's not out west. Thanks. Appreciate it.